Hey there, guys. I just got a brand new animal. I just picked up this 2-month-old red-footed tortoise. Now, this baby tortoise is absolutely adorable, but it is going to need a new home. So in today's video, I am going to be doing a very easy and reasonably inexpensive setup for a baby tortoise. So if you guys want to see how to do a quick, easy, and inexpensive setup for just about any turtle or tortoise, that is going to be in this video coming up right after this. Hey there, guys. This is Jack over at Hi Redbird, where I am tirelessly working to find new ways to make the keeping of exotic animals and pets more exciting, more affordable, and ultimately more enjoyable. And in today's video, I am going to be putting together a setup for a juvenile red-footed tortoise. Now, I just picked up this baby tortoise. It is only 2 months old, so it is still very, very tiny. But this setup will work for the vast majority of turtles or tortoises that are available in the pet trade, at least for some point of their life. Now, obviously, if you get something like a sulcata tortoise, the third largest species of tortoise in the world, those guys can easily grow to be over 100 pounds in their first 10 years of life. This setup isn't going to work for their full lifespan, but you can use a setup like this for the first 6 months to a year. There are a couple modifications you will need to make to this setup depending on your species in order to accommodate temperature and humidity variations as needed by species, but I'll talk about those as we get into them. Now, the reason that I wanted to put this video together, this video is going to be geared for brand new turtle, tortoise, or even people who have never had a reptile before. So if you don't understand a basking spot, if you don't understand a thermal gradient, I am going to go over those things. But this video is also going to be geared for people who have only purchased their animal supplies from pet supply stores. Because with the exception of one item, everything else that I'm using for this setup came from a big box hardware store. So pretty easy to get all of the materials you need. And the really, really fun thing about this is that this ends up being significantly cheaper. Most of us know that at pet supply stores, you can get a pre-made kit for certain reptiles. Usually it's going to start off at least $100 and the prices increase from there. Most of the items are not going to be ideal, and in fact, some of them are outright garbage. So you'll have to throw out certain items. With this, you can pick and choose exactly what you want, and this entire setup, with the other items that you can't even see right now, is going to be it was just under 60 bucks, so I'm pretty happy with this setup. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into how we're going to be putting this enclosure together. All right, guys, now the first thing you're going to need in doing your setup is going to be some sort of enclosure, something for your animal to live in. You do have a lot of options when it comes to what sort of container your animal is going to live in. Plastic storage totes, if they're durable enough, can be a great option. But for the purposes of this application, for having something that is easy and inexpensive, I am going to be using a masonry or concrete mixing tub. So you can find this in the hardware store, buy all the concrete supplies. It is a couple inches deep. Now, what you want to make sure for your turtle or tortoise is that once you have all of your substrate in there, so again, depending on what type of turtle or tortoise you have, you may want to have a couple of inches of substrate. You still want to have a wall that is basically the length of the turtle. Because if you don't, there is a chance that your turtle can decide to explore, get 1 foot hooked over this lip, and climb and topple out, which you want to avoid. Now, for the purposes of this baby, this is going to be a great size enclosure. And this one right here was a little over $5 in my area, so you really can't go wrong with that. It is about 18 inches by about 24 inches. Now, if you wanted something a little bit bigger, and for a bigger reptile, you're obviously going to, this would work for a baby, but it wouldn't work for all turtles and tortoises. They also had another option in the same area where you could get one that was 2 feet, so an extra 6 inches that way, by 3 feet, so an extra foot that way, which in terms of floor space would double the size of your enclosure. You could use all of the exact same items that I'm going to talk about now, but you could have a doubled enclosure, and that was $12 instead of a little over $5. So for $7, you can double the size of your enclosure. That's really not that bad. Now you are going to want some sort of substrate in there, and for the purposes of turtles and tortoises, as a general rule of thumb, my recommendation is going to be organic topsoil. Now, that's going to give your animal the opportunity to act on its natural behaviors, as long as you're cleaning it up regularly, so every day, every other day, depending on how often you feed your turtle or tortoise, how often it goes to the bathroom, things like that. As long as you're cleaning this regularly, it'll stay really nice and easy to maintain. It does usually maintain humidity at the appropriate level, and it is going to be fairly inexpensive. Now, I do want to point out that I'm using organic topsoil. You want to use something that is organic. You don't want it to have any added pesticides or herbicides, anything that could potentially impact your animal, especially because a lot of pesticides have been found to be very, very effective on reptiles as well. So even if it's like a pesticide that, is dog safe, or maybe even cat safe, it may not be reptile safe. So just avoid pesticides and herbicides. You also want to use topsoil or garden soil. The other option you usually find is going to be potting soil. Now, potting soil is made to be a little bit airier. It's made to dry out a little bit. But the downside when it comes to reptiles is that potting soil is loose and fluffy, so it doesn't have the ability to hold a burrow. So best case scenario, your animal's not really going to be able to work on its natural behaviors. It's not going to be able to dig a burrow. And worst case scenario, it's going to try to dig a burrow, and that's going to collapse on it. So again, topsoil or garden soil, usually they're the same thing, just with different names. Basically, soil that is a little bit denser, meant to go in a garden plot. That is going to be a great way to have a base substrate for your animal. For this red-footed tortoise, I have about 2.5 to 3 inches here. This was one bag of topsoil, and I had leftovers. So realistically, if I went with that doubled enclosure, I could have still gotten one bag of topsoil and had enough to be happy with this enclosure. Now, feeding containers, watering containers. Now, for the purpose of a watering container or a feeding container, the easiest thing to use for a turtle or tortoise is going to be these little plant saucers. They're incredibly inexpensive. They're fairly durable. They hold food great. You can scrub them with soap and water, get them really, really clean. If they do start to pick up a little bit of color from greens, if they start to pick up a little bit of algae, you can even bleach them to get them fully clean. Now, I have a little bit of a problem with using these for turtles and tortoises, using the smaller ones, because in my experience, they're really, really good at, getting tipped over. It's one thing if it's the food container getting tipped over, because you can go through and pick that up, but if the water container gets tipped over, that can completely flood out your enclosure. So I really like using poultry waterers that do have enough area for the animal to drink from. So you want to make sure that the area where the water comes out does have enough room for the animal to get a really good drink, and even submerge part of its body. Now, in an ideal world, this would be something that the tortoise could fully submerge in if it wanted to. And of course, you can always go with a bigger one of these, but then you have to make sure that the turtle or tortoise can get out. The poultry waterers are a really good option for me for baby turtles or tortoises, because I'm not worried about them getting stuck in it, and because all of the weight of this water is holding it down, there is no chance that a baby turtle or tortoise is going to be able to tip that over. But of course, use the food and water dishes that work best for you. Now, you are going to want to provide some sort of hide structure. The easiest thing to do is just going to be to get a basic terracotta pot, submerge it partway in the enclosure, and you can then have a hide, somewhere for your animal to hide in. You can use a variety of objects to make your enclosure look a little more natural. One thing I am going to advise against for turtles and tortoises, I am not a fan of using fake plants for turtles and tortoises. And that's because I have seen turtles and tortoises that nibble at the fake plants and run the risk of being impacted because the fake plants are usually some kind of plastic, and they're not something that the turtle or tortoise can easily pass. I've known turtles and tortoises that have had no issue with it, haven't tried for it. Obviously, every animal is different, but in my experience, it is too much of a risk for the potential benefit. So those are going to be the main things that we're going to use right over here. Now, I am going to highly recommend that you go where they have thermometers and get a thermometer and hygrometer in one. So basically that'll tell you temperature and humidity. Temperature and humidity are going to be very, very important for a reptile. And a lot of times if you go to a big box hardware store, they're going to have the little dials that have a suction cup that you can stick on the side of the enclosure. And in terms of accuracy, they are effectively garbage. You are never going to get a great result with that. So a lot of times people who have animals that aren't doing well, it's because they're using a setup like that. They don't have a good idea of what their temperature is and what their humidity is. Now there are a lot of really, really nice options. You can get a temperature gun that'll give you instant readings on the entire enclosure. And if you have a variety of reptiles, if you're getting, heavily into reptiles, that might be something you want to look into. But this one right here, this basic model, will have an accurate temperature within about 5 to 10 minutes. So when we move it around the enclosure, we can get an idea of what our temperatures are in the enclosure. And it was only about $10. So in terms of starting out, that is probably the best option I have for you guys. Now I say that we are going to be moving around this enclosure to check the temperature. And that is because we are going to have a lighting setup that is going to change the temperature over this enclosure. Reptiles typically want a gradient of temperatures. They want somewhere really, really warm that they can bask and heat their body up. Then they're going to want the rest of their enclosure to be a little bit cooler because they can't cool themselves down. So they need areas with water. They need areas with cooler temperatures where they can cool themselves down. So I am going to be setting this enclosure up. This is going to be my hot spot. There will be a basking zone right here. For a red-footed tortoise, I'm going to be aiming for a basking site between 90 to 95 degrees. And this will be my cool spot over here. For a red-footed tortoise, I am going to want the ambient temperature, or the overall temperature of the enclosure, to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 70 to 80 degrees. So since I'm inside a house, as long as it's not right in the basking spot, if this cools down to the temperature inside the rest of the house, that should be perfect. So let's go ahead and work on our lighting setup so that we can achieve that thermal gradient. All right, guys, now for setting up our lights, you may notice with this enclosure, there isn't really a great place to attach the lights. If you get something like a glass tank with a lid, or most, ready-built wooden reptile enclosures, you're going to have somewhere where you can set lights. Now we can solve that pretty easily by building a lighting frame, and I just built this out of PVC pipe. You just want to make sure that it is wide enough to accommodate the entire enclosure. Now, if you would like to build something like this, this is a modified version of the Parrot play stand that I did a video on, so you can go ahead and check that out. That'll be up at the top. Again, I can't recommend enough. Anything with animal care can pretty much be done with PVC. So if you guys don't already have a pair of ratcheting PVC cutters, you're going to want that. Now, by building this frame out, I now have the opportunity to hang lights above the enclosure. And it's, really, really simple and straightforward. So we're going to be using some basic clamp light fixtures that you can get from your big box hardware store. You will see the exact same fixtures at the pet store, usually for twice as much. So it's a great place to go ahead and get these. You do want to make sure that the fixtures that you are getting are going to be geared for the wattage of light that you are going to be using. So just read and check that out, but it's usually pretty straightforward. Now we're going to be using two different lights. And as you can see, we've mounted these lights in two different ways because of that. So the first one we're going to be using, this is the item that we got from the pet store. We are going to be using a full spectrum bulb. Turtles and tortoises need UV lighting in order to properly metabolize their food, in order to grow. If you don't provide them that, they will not do well for you. So you need to provide them full spectrum lighting. Now, obviously, the easiest and cheapest way to provide full spectrum lighting is natural sunlight. And in fact, I have not met any bulb that remotely compares to the UV that you get from natural sunlight. Reptiles do well with it. There's a reason they naturally live outside. But with a baby, I want to make sure that I keep this animal inside where it's safe, so I do need to provide it for that UV light until I can get it to an outdoor enclosure. Now, with your full spectrum lighting, you're going to want to check the brand in the box because it will give you an idea of how far away you want that to be. I'm not going to tell you guys what brand of bulb I have in there because they are not paying me to sponsor me, and I will let them if they want to. But meanwhile, it's just important for you guys to check your information and see where that bulb needs to be placed. For this bulb, they want it to be placed 12 to 18 inches above the enclosure where the animal is so that it can make the best use of that light. So I'm going to have this light centered over the enclosure so there is UV light all over the enclosure, at least when it is on. And I'm going to be using the clip that came with this enclosure because that brings it to a really good level. Now, the other thing we are going to be using a small Halogen Spotlight, and that we're going to be using for our basking site. Now, that Halogen Spotlight does not provide full spectrum lighting. That cannot be the only light that you give your animal, but it is going to be a great way to create a basking site. So what that means is directly under this bulb, it is going to be the hottest temperature, and as you move away from it, the temperature will cool down. That is what you need for a reptile. That is a thermal gradient. You have the heat that gradually cools down. And I always do this with reptiles. I'll set up the basking site on one side, and I'll set up the water on the other because it makes it easier to let the reptile cool down on one side, heat up on the other. Now this one, you'll notice I did not use the clips. This one I have wrapped around this pole. And this is going to be important for you when you are setting up your basking site because depending on the fixture you have, depending on the bulb you have, depending on the substrate, depending on a variety of different factors, how far that bulb needs to be to maintain your temperature is going to change. So that clip light didn't get me where I wanted it to be. So by wrapping this, I not only have the ability to move this further and closer while still keeping this on the same spot. It's still mounted, but I can also adjust it. So if I want to put other animals in here, if I wanted to have sulcata tortoises, which typically need to be a little bit warmer for their basking site, I can go ahead and lower that a little bit. If I had more temperate turtles, I could bring it up. Now you are going to want to secure these lights. Probably one of the biggest injuries that I see with turtles and tortoises is going to be injuries related to heat lamps and heat bulbs, trying to keep them warm. The lights fall down and your animal gets burned. So we can fix that really easily with cable ties. So if you're going to use this setup here where you have it just wrapped for your basking site, all you want to do is wrap that 2 or 3 times and then go ahead and just secure that right there. It's going to be really hard for that to adjust. Now, if you want to adjust it, clip the cable tie, move it to where you want it, and then resecure it, and it'll be good to go. Now, for the purposes of your clip, what you're going to want to do, get your clip on there, and then feed the cable tie through so that the clip is then cable tied to this support pole. Now you are still going to have the opportunity to direct your light because the fitting does allow it to swivel and shift, but it's not going to run the risk of falling down. So a cable tie is going to help you so much in that situation. Once again, I know so many people that'll get these type of lights and they'll say, oh, it's fine, the clip is really strong, and those are the people that the lights fall. So for the cost of a cable tie, you can ensure that that's not going to happen, please just do me a favor and go ahead and use that for your animals. Now, the other thing you can do with the cable ties, you can go ahead and do cord management because that looks kind of rough, and especially because this basking light is getting so hot, I don't want this cord running into it and potentially burning. So I can go ahead and I can run these cords up and over the PVC pole, and it just neatens the entire thing up. Now, there's a couple of other things that you're going to need in order to ensure that your animals are doing well. So you are going to need a lighting timer. If you think you are one of those people who will make sure that your animals are getting the appropriate amount of light every single day, you'll wake up in the morning, you'll turn on your light, at the end of the day, you'll turn the lights off. I'm here to tell you that that is a nice ambition, but it almost never comes to fruition. You can go ahead and get a lighting timer. This is the most basic model they have. This one right here is about $5. You can get a digital lighting timer that'll have a couple of different programs. That one was starting at about $10. So you can get a lighting timer for fairly inexpensive, and it will take care of everything. Now, the lighting timer is only going to have one outlet on the side, and since we are going to be running 2 lights that are running at the exact same time, you're also going to need some kind of extension cord just so you can make sure that you are getting both of your lights into that lighting timer. Obviously, do things safely. If you're running more than 2 lights, I'm safe with. If you're running a little bit more than that, you may want to look at something like a surge protector, or a multi-pronged outlet that is geared for that higher electrical use. With 2 lights, I'm comfortable just using the extension cord, but again, do what is safe for you. So this is a pretty easy setup. Now, the only other thing you're really missing for this setup is going to be your tortoise. So here I have my baby red-footed tortoise. Now, for a lot of people, they would think when you're doing a reptile setup, the first thing you need is the animal that is going to go in there. And I am going to encourage you guys, if you want to do a setup like this, do the setup first and then get the reptile. Have the entire setup completely done. Because again, since we're using things like this thermometer and hygrometer to check our basking side, to check our ambient temperature, it can be a little bit of time before you get that fully keyed in. Now, I did tell you guys you might need to make some adjustments for the humidity. Obviously, there are things you can do like a larger water bowl. If you need to increase the humidity, you can go to a smaller water bowl as long as your animal can still drink out of it. If your animal can't drink out of it, that's effectively pointless. But if you go to a smaller water bowl, that'll bring your humidity down. If you change how often you're misting or wetting the substrate, that can adjust your humidity. And if none of those are working for you, there are a couple of options you can do to the substrate itself in order to change your humidity. If you need to bring your humidity down, go ahead and add some bank sand or something else porous like that. That'll help to keep that humidity lower. If you want to increase the humidity, you're going to want to add a natural product. So things like wood chips or sphagnum moss, as long as they are reptile safe. You want to make sure that you're not using something that is made for florists or anything like that that has been treated with chemicals. But as long as what you're using is reptile safe, wood chips and sphagnum moss, you can mix that into the substrate. That'll generally bring your humidity up. So that's really, really simple. So I can't have the lights on while I am recording because the glare completely blocks out the camera. So I am going to go ahead. I am going to get this enclosure fully set up. And then this baby red-footed tortoise is going to have a brand new home. Now, one problem I have, this baby red-footed tortoise does not have a name. So if you guys have any suggestions for a name for this baby red-footed tortoise, go ahead and leave them in the comment section down below. Again, this type of setup is going to be useful for a wide variety of turtles and tortoises. So if this video was helpful for you guys, go ahead, give it a thumbs up. If you like this kind of content, you probably want to go ahead and subscribe to the channel. because I am working to put out a lot of new reptile content, a lot of exotic animal content, so birds, fish, so all sorts of things like that will be on the Hi Redbird channel. I do want to thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time. I need to say thank you to my Patreon patrons for helping to make these videos possible. You can find out more by visiting Hi Redbird on Patreon or clicking the link in the description section down below if you would like more information. Thanks!